So, today is International Men's Day, and it's likely upon hearing that you have the same reaction I did when I first heard it. But it's more than just yet another thing that has a day about it, and there's a much bigger reason to be less cynical. The theme for this year is Stop Male Suicide. It's a little known fact that despite women being twice as likely to suffer from depression as men, 75% of all the suicides in the UK last year were committed by males. There's this archaic notion that men should not talk about their issues, that real men don't cry, and this nauseating phrase of man up is taking a toll on the health of thousands of men every year. It never really struck me as weird that being a sort of young male in my 20s and talking openly about my depression, that it was something unusual. The idea of a man not just suffering from depression but being comfortable talking about it in public seems to be quite a rare one, and it's something that people sometimes don't even know how to deal with. But openly talking about my condition and trying to raise awareness of depression is a really big deal for me, and I often wonder if I knew what I know now about depression 10 years ago, and if I felt as comfortable talking about it then as I do today, whether I'd still be in the same position I'm in now. I'm grateful that I'm as comfortable talking about it as I am, and I can only hope that me doing this helps encourage others to reach out, especially if they need help. And those reasons are why, for this video, I've decided to broach the issues surrounding my mental health and talk openly about my experiences with battling depression. My first experience of depression happened around the age of 16. Obviously, being a teenager is a difficult time in most people's lives. For me, I was not just overweight but obese, and that has its own issues. Being the youngest of 4 children meant that whilst I obviously looked up to them, I'd also always find myself comparing myself to them. And that's left a significant impact on my life. To this day, I battle issues with a lack of self-worth and never really feeling good enough at what I do, or feeling like I deserve certain things in life. In the summer of 2008, I was dealt the double blow of my brother leaving for the university and the closest friends I had at school leaving to go to a different college. My brother's 2 years older than me, and for my entire life we've sort of shared a bedroom with each other and always had this closeness. In fact, when we were younger, people often used to mistake us as twins, and I had no idea quite how much him going away to university would affect me. But I mean, looking back with hindsight, it's clear that I went through some kind of grieving process with that affected me for quite some time. I mean, I'd grown up in a busy house with 3 siblings and both my parents, but after that summer, I was the only child left. And for that to coincide with my closest friends leaving school, it left me in a dark place. I mean, I still have issues today sort of surrounding abandonment, and I can't help but feel that much of that begun back then. I mean, I've never really been an overly social person, but at this time in my life I started withdrawing myself more and more. I would shut myself away from people in a room, and I even had this special bench in town where I could just sit and feel safe, and I would just go there when things felt like they was getting too much. It wasn't long after this that I decided to go teetotal. As someone that didn't really socialise that much, I only had a limited experience with alcohol, but in those experiences I found that it didn't really do much for me. This abstinence not only just gave me a good reason for why I wouldn't socialise with others, but it also seemed to harbour resentment to those that did drink. And now I can look back at that decision gratefully. Becoming straight edge at an early age helped build up this resilience with depression and just this strength of resolve against drinking or taking drugs, and knowing that there's never any danger of me slipping into that now, even when the depression gets really, really bad. It means that I know there's always going to be an easier journey out of the darkness. It wasn't just the irritability and the withdrawal from situations. The depression also began to have a noticeable effect on my school life. I went from getting A's and B's and taking GCSE maths a year early to failing and having to resit an entire year of my A-levels. In these years there's also a couple of occasional rare moments when I turned to self-harm. Nothing too severe, but just enough to just momentarily relieve the pressure and to take my mind off things. For years I'd look back on that period of my life confused. I felt guilty referring to myself as being depressed, and at the time I didn't really understand what that meant. I thought that the irritability and the withdrawal was just me being a typical teenager, and it didn't particularly feel that what I was experiencing was severe enough to be depression. I guess I didn't really feel like good enough, or I guess bad enough to be depressed, and that in a way just made me feel worse. Several years later the depression would return, but this time with much more intense symptoms. Insomnia was a new one, and at its worst I'd get maybe 2-3 hours of sleep a night. And stress would bring on tension headaches, which then would bring on nosebleeds, and I'd find myself becoming stressed because I couldn't sleep, and then being able to smell or taste like the nosebleeds, and then getting stressed again about that. As time wore on, the symptoms intensified, and I'd go from breaking down in tears a couple of times a week to, as times wore on, the symptoms intensified. I'd find myself going from breaking down in tears a couple of times a week to breaking down every day, until it reached a point where I was in tears several times a day. And I was hiding it from all those around me. My family had no clue what was going on, and my girlfriend really only knew snippets. The energy that it took for me to appear normal in front of family and colleagues at work was only making the situation worse. In 2014 I went to the doctors for the first time in an attempt to seek medical help. But ultimately it felt like a waste of time. A number of cancelled appointments or rearrangements meant that eventually I just ended up giving up. For the past 7 years my home life's had a secret hidden just barely beneath the surface. A sort of complex relationship with my girlfriend where I'm not just her partner, but at times also her caregiver. In the early years, as a partner and caregiver, I'd feel the pressure of having to keep her fed, to keep her sane, just to keep the house clean whilst also trying to hold down a full-time job. Her health has thrown a lot at us over the years, from extreme cases of eczema herpeticum, numerous week-long stays in hospital, MRSA infections, and even a mini stroke. And all of those happened just in 1 year. In 2013, I was also spending a lot of my spare time running all over the country to try and raise money and awareness for charity. Eventually something had to break, and unfortunately for me it was my mental health. My counselling sessions highlighted just how much of an effect that Jenny's health has had on me, and I carried that burden with me for a couple of months. When you see someone you love in so much pain every day, it's going to have an effect. When you're relied on so much to always be strong and to always be there to support them, eventually the pressure's just got too much. I felt guilty that the cause of this latest bout of depression could cynically be blamed on one person, and I carried that guilt with me every day. I spent months battling with myself, trying to hide this obvious cause of my depression because I just didn't want to make her feel any worse. Things are much better now. It's been 3 months since I had my last counselling session, and I'm still waiting to hear back on the next line of treatment. Whilst I can happily say that it hasn't happened for a few weeks, there's definitely been times this year where I've spent hours sat on the floor in tears, either at home or at work. And nowadays there isn't a bench to sit on, but I still have my methods to try and control my depression. I meditate, I chill out with goats, and obviously there's the running. I know that the battle is far from over, but it's definitely one that I'm winning at the moment. I can only ask from those watching this video that if you know someone who's battling with depression, then please reach out to them. They may not reply straight away, but trust me, the knowledge that someone is out there who genuinely cares how you're doing really does mean a lot. And if you are watching this and you're suffering in silence, then please talk to someone about this. Comment on this video, or look at the links in my description for my social media and email me. You don't have to be alone on this. And please, just don't be afraid of talking to someone.